Christian Bale won an Oscar nomination playing him. The film made $225 million at the box office. His name is finally known to the world. But Ford vs. Ferrari is 2.5 hours long, and the real Ken Miles needed more than that. The film gave you the accent, the temper, the flying wrenches, and the heartbreak of Le Mans. What it did not give you was the soldier, the gentleman, the man who already knew Ford was going to cost him the race before it even happened, and the full devastating truth of how he died. That story is longer, and it is better. The man the film invented and the man who actually existed. Ford vs. Ferrari opens with Ken Miles as a barely functioning disaster. His shop is failing. His temper is volcanic. He throws wrenches at customers and argues with racing officials. Christian Bale plays all of it brilliantly, and the performance is so magnetic that most people walk away believing they understand who Ken Miles was. They understand a character. The real man was considerably more interesting. Kenneth Henry Jarvis Miles was born on November 1, 1918, in Sutton Coldfield, near Birmingham, England. He left school at 15 to work as an apprentice at Wolseley Motors, who sent him to a technical school to broaden his knowledge of vehicle construction. From his earliest working years, Miles was not a driver who happened to understand machines. He was a machine man who happened to be able to drive them faster than almost anyone alive. The nicknames his American crew gave him tell you something the film never bothered to include. He was known as Teddy Teabag because of his incessant tea drinking, and Sidebite because he often spoke out of the side of his mouth. These are not the nicknames of a volatile hothead. They are the nicknames of a man his crew found genuinely affectionate and approachable enough to tease. You do not give warm nicknames to people who frighten you. People who raced against Miles knew how much of a gentleman driver he was, earning the nickname the Sterling Moss of the West Coast. He was regarded as a clean driver because of his extraordinary feel for cars' limits, which prevented him from making contact with other drivers even in aggressive racing situations. In 1960s racing terms, being called the Sterling Moss of the West Coast was roughly the highest compliment one professional could pay another. What the war actually did to him. The film gives you one line about Ken Miles' military service. Carroll Shelby says he landed a busted tank on the beach at D-Day and drove it clean across Europe. It is a great line. It is also not quite accurate, and the truth is more revealing. Miles' first role in the military was as a driving instructor in the Territorial Army. On October 1, 1942, as an armament artificer, he was among the founding members of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers and transferred to the REME training establishment. The following year, he was posted to Guards Armored Division workshops, then the 29th Armored Brigade workshop. He landed in Normandy on June 15, 1944, and was later posted to the Light Aid Detachment of the 15th, 19th King's Royals Hussars. He served until the end of the war, reaching the rank of Staff Sergeant and serving as a tank commander. The Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers existed for one purpose: keeping Britain's armored vehicles in fighting condition under active combat. These were not mechanics in clean workshops behind the lines. They operated in the same terrain as the tanks they were keeping alive, under the same fire, with the same urgency. When a tank broke down in combat, it was not a scheduling inconvenience. It was a matter of who lived and who died. Miles spent years learning exactly where the line between a machine that works and a machine that kills actually sits. He learned it in conditions where a wrong diagnosis did not cost you a race. It cost you your crew. The record nobody has broken in 60 years. No driver in history has ever won the 24 hours of Daytona, the 12 hours of Sebring, and the 24 hours of Le Mans in the same calendar year. Not Andretti, not Alonso, not anyone. That record has stood for 60 years, not because nobody has tried, but because the only man who ever held all three in his hands on the same day was ordered to slow down a few hundred meters from the finish line. Miles won Daytona in 1966, sharing the Ford GT Mk2 with Lloyd Ruby, then won Sebring. 2 legs of the Triple Crown in the same year, both dominant, both commanding. Then came Le Mans. and Miles built a lead of almost 4 full laps over his nearest Ford teammate before being ordered to slow down to engineer a dead heat photo finish. 4 laps, not 4 seconds. 4 full laps of a 24-hour race. Ken Miles was not in a close battle with his teammates. He was in a different race from them entirely. When Miles was told of the dead heat plan in the pit lane, he was crushed and furious. His mechanic, Charlie Agapio, one of the most credible witnesses to what happened that day, was blunt about it. He said Miles did exactly what he was told, slowed down on the back straight and let McLaren unlap himself. He followed his orders, and then he got it done. The betrayal within the betrayal. Ford vs. Ferrari presents Leo Beebe as a calculating villain who engineered the photo finish, knowing it would deny Miles the victory. That is at least partially true. But the film leaves out the most heartbreaking part of the story. Carroll Shelby later said, "I felt wonderful about us winning 1, 2, and 3 in 1966. But Ken Miles, we made a horrible decision in seeing the 3 cars come over exactly together. It was good politically for Ford, and I worked for Ford, and I am not going to go against Henry Ford." And in a more private account, Shelby went further. When Ford racing manager Leo Beebe asked him what he thought should happen at the finish, Shelby said he thought Ken should win because he had been leading for all those hours. Then Beebe said he would rather see all 3 cross together, and Shelby said, "Then let us do it that way." Not knowing the French officials would interpret the regulations as they did, not a calculated conspiracy, a casual conversation between 2 men who thought they were doing something manageable. And the most extraordinary driver of his generation paid the price. The regulations concerning cars finishing together indicated that their starting positions should be taken into account. McLaren's car had started further back on the grid and had therefore technically converted more distance in the same time. A gap of just 20 meters at the finish line, the closest in Le Mans history, was all that separated Ken Miles from the most unbreakable record in endurance motorsport. The car that had already killed someone. 2 months after Le Mans, on August 17, 1966, Ken Miles drove to Riverside International Raceway in the California desert to test the Ford J car. Ford vs. Ferrari shows him dying in a fire caused by brake failure. The real circumstances were different, and in several ways, considerably darker. The J car featured a bread van-shaped rear section, experimenting with camback aerodynamic theories, and a honeycomb panel design intended to lighten and stiffen the car. The design was unproven at racing speeds, and the J car had already killed someone before Ken Miles ever climbed into it. Walt Hansgen, a 4-time SCCA road racing champion and one of the most respected drivers in America, died while testing a Ford prototype at the Le Mans test weekend in April 1966. Ford shelved the J car entirely after his death, halting the program. And then, 4 months later, they put Ken Miles in it. After almost a day of testing at Riverside, in the very hot Southern California desert, Miles approached the end of the track's 1-mile downhill back straight at a top speed estimated at over 200 miles per hour, when the car suddenly flipped, crashed, and caught fire. The car broke into pieces and ejected Miles, killing him instantly. The car went off the track at the easiest curve to negotiate on the circuit, which drew immediate speculation that the accident was caused by mechanical failure rather than driver error. The fire that followed consumed most of the car's remains. The evidence that might have explained exactly what happened burned before investigators could reach it. The legacy built on his death. In the decades since the crash, the physics became clearer. After the accident, the J car's aerodynamics were extensively redesigned to correct rear-end lift generated at race speeds. The distinctive camback rear section that Ford's engineers had been most excited about was, at certain speeds, behaving like an aircraft wing, generating lift under the rear of the car. At over 200 miles per hour on a downhill straight in hot desert air, the rear of that car was fighting against the road. And at some point, it won. Ken Miles did not crash the J car. The car failed him. As a direct result of the accident, a heavy-gauge steel roll cage was made mandatory for all new race cars. The revised car was renamed the Ford GT MK4 and won the only 2 races it was entered for, Sebring 1967 and Le Mans, 1967. That roll cage almost certainly saved Mario Andretti's life at Le Mans in 1967, when Andretti had a massive accident and walked away from a car that was effectively destroyed around him. Roll cages became standardized in sports car racing following Miles' death. The safety architecture protecting racing drivers today has a direct line back to a Tuesday afternoon in California, when the evidence burned before anyone found the truth. The Mark IV that won Le Mans in 1967 was built on the lessons of what killed Ken Miles. From beyond the grave, in the most literal sense of that phrase, he made it possible. Carroll Shelby said afterward, "We have nobody to take his place. Nobody. He was our baseline, our guiding point. He was the backbone of our program. There will never be another Ken Miles." He was right on every count. What was really taken? Ken Miles was posthumously inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in 2001, 35 years after his death. For more than 3 decades, the man Carroll Shelby called the backbone of Ford's entire Le Mans program was known only to the people who had been there. His wife Molly wrote to Road and Track magazine in November 1966, words that cut through every mythology the film built around her husband. She wrote, "Nothing could ever replace what I have lost. Sometimes controversial, sometimes turbulent, but we have been happy." That is not the portrait of a tortured genius consumed by racing. That is a man who had built a life he loved, with people he loved, doing work that genuinely fulfilled him. And it was taken from him by a car that had already proven it could kill, on a track where the evidence burned before anyone found the truth. 2 months after the most extraordinary achievement in endurance motorsport history was denied him by a casual conversation in a pit lane. The Triple Crown of endurance racing in a single year remains unclaimed, 60 years and counting. Not because nobody has tried, because the only man who ever had all 3 in his hands was told to slow down. His name was finally a household word. It took a Hollywood film and 60 years to get there, and the film still left the most important parts on the cutting room floor.